Back in the day, Dublin wasn't just a city of writers and poets, it was the whiskey capital of the world, a place where the Uisce Baha, the water of life, flowed like the Liffey itself. By the late 19th century, the city was brimming with distilleries, grand operations like John Jameson's on Bow Street, and George Rowe's massive works on Thomas Street. These weren't small-time affairs, mind you. They were industrial powerhouses, employing thousands of Dubliners and shipping their golden liquid to every corner of the globe. The air in certain parts of the city, especially around an area nicknamed the Golden Triangle, was thick with the sweet, malty smell of brewing, a constant reminder of the city's most famous and valuable export. The heart of this industry was a part of the city called the Liberties. It was a crowded, bustling neighborhood, a maze of narrow streets, ancient tenements, and small workshops, all huddled in the shadow of the great distilleries. Life here was tough, a real struggle for many families who lived cheek by jowl in conditions that would shock us today. But it was also a place with a fierce sense of community, where everyone knew everyone else's business. The distilleries and the associated trades, from coopers making barrels to carters driving the drays, provided a living for a huge chunk of the population, making whiskey not just a drink, but the very lifeblood of the area. Whiskey was stored in massive quantities in bonded warehouses, great stone buildings packed to the rafters with wooden casks. These warehouses were like treasure chests, holding millions of liters of maturing spirit. One of the biggest was Malone's bonded storehouse, situated on RD Street. It held a truly staggering amount of whiskey, over 5,000 barrels of it, all waiting to reach the perfect age. This wasn't the stuff you'd find in a bottle at the pub. This was pure, uncut spirit straight from the still, incredibly strong and highly flammable. The sheer value of the contents of these warehouses was immense, a fortune in sleeping spirit. On the evening of the 18th of June, 1875, Dublin was a city going about its usual business. The workers were heading home, the pubs were filling up, and the summer evening was settling over the Liberties. No one had the slightest inkling of the catastrophe that was about to unfold. The immense store of whiskey in Malone's warehouse sat silently, a potent and dangerous sea of alcohol, needing only a single unfortunate spark to be unleashed. The stage was set for one of the most bizarre and tragic disasters in the city's long and storied history, a night that would be remembered not for flames, but for a flood of a different kind. The disaster began in the most ordinary of ways, inside Malone's warehouse on RD Street. The exact cause of the fire was never officially determined, but it's thought that the heat of the summer's day, combined with the vapors from the alcohol, might have been a factor, or perhaps a simple accident with a lantern. Whatever the spark, it found the perfect fuel. The flames took hold with terrifying speed, tearing through the wooden barrels. As the intense heat burst the casks open, a torrent of raw, burning whiskey was released. It wasn't just a fire anymore. It was a flowing river of liquid flame, a sight that must have seemed like something from the very depths of hell. This terrifying river of fire, 6 inches deep and several feet wide, began to pour out from the warehouse doors and onto the surrounding streets. It surged down RD Street, Mill Street, and Chamber Street, a glowing blue-flamed current that consumed everything in its path. It flowed into the gutters and drains, setting the paving stones themselves alight. The fire was unlike a normal blaze. Water was utterly useless against it. Firefighters who arrived on the scene quickly realized that spraying water on the burning spirit only made it spread further, carrying the flames to new areas. The firemen were faced with a unique and dreadful challenge. Instead of water, the authorities had to resort to a very different method to contain the fiery flood. They called for every horse and cart they could find and sent them to the quays to gather sand and gravel, but that wasn't enough. The real breakthrough came when they realized what could stop the flow: manure. The streets of 19th century Dublin were piled high with horse manure, and this unlikely material became the city's salvation. Firefighters and soldiers worked frantically, building massive, steaming dams of dung across the streets to block the whiskey's path, and eventually smother the strange blue flames that danced upon its surface. The fire itself was an incredible spectacle. The burning whiskey gave off very little smoke, instead casting an eerie, supernatural blue light over the entire neighborhood. The heat was immense, but the real danger was the speed and unpredictability of the flow. It lapped at the doors of the tenement houses, threatening to engulf the buildings and trap the families inside. People were woken from their sleep not by the smell of smoke, but by a strange light and a growing commotion outside. Panic began to spread through the narrow streets as residents scrambled to escape the relentless, creeping tide of liquid fire that was consuming their world. In the maze of yards and sheds behind the tenement buildings, many families kept pigs. These animals, it turned out, were the first to sound a proper alarm. As the river of burning whiskey flowed into the back lanes and pens, the pigs began to squeal in absolute terror. Their panicked cries, loud and piercing in the night, cut through the noise of the fire and alerted many residents who were still asleep inside their homes. These squeals were a more effective warning than any church bell, giving families precious moments to grab their children and flee from their homes before the fiery liquid could trap them. It's a strange detail, but dozens of people owed their lives to those terrified pigs. As people poured out onto the streets, they were met with a truly unbelievable sight. The gutters were not filled with water, but with a river of whiskey. While the fire was being fought up the street, a vast amount of unburnt spirit was pooling in the lower parts of the neighborhood. For the poverty-stricken residents of the Liberties, this was a sight beyond their wildest dreams. It looked as though a river of free drink had miraculously appeared on their doorsteps. In a moment of madness, the desperate poverty and the sudden, incredible opportunity collided. The instinct for self-preservation was tragically overtaken by a more primal urge. People ran towards the whiskey, not away from it. They used whatever they could find to scoop up the spirit pots, pans, hats, and even their own boots were used as makeshift cups. They knelt in the streets, cupping their hands to drink directly from the flow. The scene descended into a chaotic, drunken frenzy. They were completely unaware of the grave danger they were in. This wasn't a finished, bottled product. It was cask-strength whiskey, a raw spirit that hadn't been diluted with water. It was more than twice the strength of normal whiskey, a potent and lethal poison when consumed in such large quantities so quickly. The authorities, already struggling to fight the fire, were now faced with a second, even more bizarre crisis. They tried to warn the people, to push them back from the dangerous flow, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The crowd was frantic, desperate to get their share before it was all gone. It was a mass hysteria fueled by generations of hardship and the sudden, unbelievable appearance of what they saw as a gift from God. The tragedy was no longer about the fire, which was slowly being contained. A new, silent killer was now at work in the streets of the Liberties, one that the people had willingly invited in. In the cold light of morning, the scale of the human tragedy became horribly clear. The fire itself had been extinguished without a single death from burns or smoke inhalation. The quick-thinking use of manure dams and the warning from the pigs had saved the buildings and the people inside them. But the streets told a different story. In the aftermath, 13 people were found dead. They hadn't been touched by the flames. They had died from acute alcohol poisoning, having drunk themselves to death with the raw, potent whiskey they had scooped from the gutters. Their bodies were found in the streets where they had fallen. The final toll was grim. Besides the 13 who died, dozens more were rushed to hospital, suffering from the effects of drinking the industrial-strength spirit. It was a deeply shocking outcome for the city. The newspapers of the day described the disgraceful scenes of people wallowing in the drink. The financial cost was also immense. Over £6 million in today's money worth of whiskey was lost, a massive blow to the distillery and the city's economy. The fire had destroyed a fortune in property and spirit, but the real cost was measured in the needless loss of human life in such a strange and sorry way. The Great Dublin Whiskey Fire of 1875 went down in history as one of the city's most unusual disasters. It served as a stark and powerful lesson. The event highlighted the dangers of storing such vast quantities of flammable liquid in the heart of a densely populated residential area. In the years that followed, regulations around bonded warehouses and the storage of spirits were reviewed and tightened, not just in Dublin but across the United Kingdom. It was a wake-up call for the industry, a fiery reminder of the immense responsibility that came with producing the nation's favorite spirit. Today, the story is remembered as a peculiar and tragic chapter in Dublin's history. It's a tale that speaks volumes about the city in the 19th century. Its industrial might, the extreme poverty of its people, and the central role that whiskey played in its identity. The fire itself was spectacular, but it's the deeply human tragedy of those who died from a river of drink that makes the story so memorable and so haunting. It serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest danger isn't the fire itself, but the choices people make in a moment of chaos and desperation.